public speaking students. This is Dr. Klein with a brief video introducing you to your final formal speech presentation for our public speaking class. This is going to be a group presentation, and we're going to take advantage of the 2016 presidential primary season to take all of the various skills that you've been developing over the past several weeks this semester and introducing one final wrinkle. That is the need to collaborate and provide a coherent presentation with multiple members. So how is this going to work? Well, what we're going to have you do is produce an in-person campaign infomercial. How is this going to work? Well, the basic requirements of the group presentation are as follows. You're going to have teams of 4 to 5 members, and at this point you will probably have already had those team assignments announced. What you're going to be ultimately producing is a group presentation that should go 20 to 25 minutes. And ideally, we would like to work this a little bit closer to the 20-minute mark than the 25-minute mark for reasons that I'll mention in just a bit. What we're going to be doing is having you produce a live campaign infomercial for the 2016 presidential primary. What you're going to do is imagine that you are a super PAC or an organization that is primarily responsible for raising education and interest as well as funds and campaign resources for a presidential candidate of your choice. Now, each of your groups has been assigned a presidential candidate, and the way that you're going to do your presentation is one of 2 possible options. Either what you're going to do is provide an infomercial in which your super PAC is supporting your assigned candidate, and so you're going to provide a persuasive presentation that voters should actually vote for this candidate that you're advocating for. The other option is perhaps you are a super PAC that is specifically devoted to defeating a particular candidate. And so your 20 to 25 minute infomercial will be designed to persuade your audience that the candidate you are opposing is a bad idea and that voters should not vote for that assigned candidate. Whether or not your group decides to support the candidate or oppose the candidate that you've been assigned is entirely up to you. Now, what else do you need to know? Well, the speech is going to have to incorporate presentation aids. We saw some great examples of how those can work during the persuasive speech round. So the specific strategies for using these presentation aids, again, is entirely up to your group. But you should think about what's going to be most persuasive for your audience. So think about things like photographic images or video clips, uses of graphs or charts to provide statistical information. You can provide textual information through bullet points. In fact, you might recognize that this video is produced using PowerPoint. But you may want to make that call whether or not using textual bullet points would be the best possible approach for something that would be an infomercial as opposed to a more informative briefing or presentation. Again, presentation aids are up to you. Decide what you think will be most persuasive. There's going to be a minimum of 8 researched evidence sources for this presentation. At least 4 of these sources need to be from the candidate's campaign website. Now, when I say 4 sources from the campaign website, you might be thinking to yourself, well, isn't the website just one source? Well, yes and no. The website is going to have a variety of different materials. Each of the web pages that is part of the website can potentially be a source. There may be specific pages in the website that are devoted to positions and information on specific policy platforms. Issues that the candidate is supporting or proposals that they have. There could be speeches or press conferences or press releases on the campaign website, and those can potentially be separate research sources. You'll want them to be substantive enough that you can get good information out of them. Now, obviously, if you're supporting a candidate, using information from the campaign's official website is going to make good sense. Now, if your team decides to oppose the candidate, that doesn't mean that the information from the candidate's website is not going to be helpful to you. Indeed, what you might find is you need to have specific information about what the candidate has said that they're supporting or positions that they've presented or other kinds of ideas that they've used to try to persuade audiences so that you can actually refute them. You can provide opposing arguments as to why what they're saying doesn't make sense or other sorts of strategies you might use to oppose them. But at least 4 of your sources need to come from the campaign website. And then the other 4 sources, and again, of course, you can have more than 8 sources, but these sources need to come from objective, journalistic, or academic sources. So think newspapers, news magazines, online news sources, academic research journals, things like that. What you want to be careful of is that there are lots of periodicals out there and occasionally some news presentations on cable news networks that will not be politically objective. For instance, there are magazines such as The Nation or The Progressive that tend to lean toward the liberal left. There are magazines like The American Spectator and National Review that are very specifically conservative. You want to try to avoid those kinds of research sources and instead try to get information from objective journalism and objective academic research. This way, you'll be able to persuade your audience based on good, credible, reliable evidence and avoid the possibility that the evidence sources that you're finding are biased. So as I said, you can use more than 8 sources if you like, but at least 4 need to come from the website of the candidate and at least 4 need to come from objective research sources. And one of the things that you'll want to prepare for, in addition to the formal presentation, is making sure that the members of your group are sufficiently knowledgeable about the candidate, at least in terms of the things that you're talking about in the speech, to be able to address questions from the audience. We're going to try to have at least a couple of minutes after your presentation is concluded to have a Q&A period. So this is one of the reasons why we'd like your presentation to be a little bit closer to 20 minutes than 25 minutes. So, how should you prepare this presentation? There's a few things that you'll want to keep in mind. First of all, and just because this is a group presentation doesn't mean that the preparation shouldn't be pretty much the same as any kind of public speaking presentation. So a working outline is going to be in order. The difference is that this working order is going to be collaboratively developed by the 4 of you or the 5 of you, but you're going to use exactly the same format as previous speeches. So there's really nothing going to be new here except the fact that the outline is going to be longer. You're going to want to have a standard introduction and conclusion using the same pieces as we've used for the previous 2 speeches. You want to make sure those are labeled as usual. You're going to want to probably have no more than 3 main points for the body of your presentation, and it'll be a good idea if these 3 main points are presented by different speakers. We'll want to have relatively equal participation in the infomercial presentation. I'll say a little bit more about that in just a minute. And it'll probably be a good idea as you're developing the body with each of these 3 main points, if each of the points are developed thinking about it as the body of a 5-minute speech with internal transitions. So essentially, the 3 speakers that are developing these 3 points will basically be preparing a mini speech that will go within the larger presentation. The only difference will be that these mini speeches won't have an introduction and a conclusion in the traditional sense. So consider it like this. Let's imagine we've got 3 main points for your presentation. One of these main points would speak to the biography of the candidate, mentioning ideas like the relevant life story, the political and professional experience of the candidate, and why this candidate decided to run for president. Let's say this is the second speaker in the presentation because the first speaker provided the introduction for the whole thing. The A, B, and C subpoints for this main point of the whole presentation would essentially be the main points of your mini speech. So you would develop them like these are main points with topic sentences, and then within each of those A, B, and C subpoints, you would develop additional subpoints to develop each of those ideas, just like you would the main points for your individual speeches. And you would do the same thing with the third speaker, providing the second main body point on the candidate's political philosophy and leadership. Maybe the main points of this section are the candidate's sense of the overarching problems facing America, the best role for the government and president, how we should address these problems, and thirdly, the candidate's approach to leadership. Again, each of those would be the main point of a mini speech that you would develop further with evidence and reasoning and subpoints. And then maybe a third main point from the next speaker on the candidate's policy platform. Maybe there's 2 or 3 specific policy issues that are most important to this candidate and or most important to persuade your audience. And so this section of the speech presentation would have a main point for each of those major issues. Now remember, I want to underscore this is just an example of the way that you might set up the larger campaign infomercial body. You could use this template if you want, or you can organize it in different ways. Obviously, if you're opposing the candidate, this particular approach might not necessarily be the best for you. So this is just one example. How you choose to do it is entirely up to you as long as it's organized. But anyway, assuming that you have a body structure, whether it looks like this or something else, you can imagine for a 20 to 25 minute presentation with this complex structure, you're going to need to make sure that it's very organized and you lead the audience through this organization. So you're going to want to have internal roadmaps. Remember, if each of these main points is essentially a 4 to 5 minute mini speech, you're going to want to have roadmaps at the beginning of each of those main points to let us know what the primary points within those sections are going to be. Remember, the key is to help the audience anticipate and follow your organizational structure. And then, of course, transitions are going to be absolutely essential. So if these are 3 mini speeches, then you're going to use transitions the way that you would use them for any speech. In between those main point sections, you're going to sum up what you just said, preview what the next point is going to be. The only difference is there'll be transitions between those major sections where one student who's presenting is going to be transitioning to the next section and introducing the next speaker. So in between section 1 and 2, there'll be a transition from one speaker to the next. In between section 2 and 3, there'll be a transition from one speaker to the next. And then, of course, as you can imagine, there might be a brief segue introduction between the intro for the entire infomercial and the first main point. And then after that main point 3, there might be a brief segue transition into the conclusion. So again, we're using the exact same organizational principles as we always have for these speeches. We're just basically taking 3 mini speeches and bringing them together. Okay, so the final preparation guideline should come as no surprise. You'll want to make sure that the outline is concluded with a references list of all the sources that you're going to cite using correct APA style. Now, of course, this is going to require that your group work together pretty carefully, not just having individual folks outlining their own particular sections, but part of your preparation is going to involve making sure that all of these pieces are put together in a coherent way. So, for instance, making sure that all of the sources that are being cited by the various members of the group end up getting put together in one complete and correctly formatted references list. All right, what else do you need to know? You need to think about persuasion strategies. Remember, this is an infomercial. So if your super PAC is supporting the candidate, you need to make sure that you're focused on getting that audience, the audience that you're speaking to in the room as your target audience, you want them to support your candidate through their vote and maybe other ways, through donating money or donating time as a volunteer, talking to their friends and family. And the same is going to be true if you're a super PAC that's opposing the candidate. You're going to want to make sure you focus on persuasion strategies focused on dissuading your audience from voting for that candidate. You want them to oppose that candidate. Not only don't vote for them, but talk to their friends, maybe donate time or money to the super PAC to make sure that they're assisting in the effort to make sure that this candidate doesn't get elected. So just as we were working with in the persuasive speech as individuals, you want to bring these into the campaign infomercial strategies. Remember audience analysis and adaptation. This is absolutely crucial. You'll remember from the very first survey we did at the beginning of the semester, we got some specific audience data about folks who consider themselves liberal, conservative, or moderate, folks that consider themselves Democratic, Republican, independent, or apolitical. You also have other information about issues that the audience thinks are important to them. There's a variety of specific policy issues and value questions that were part of that initial survey. Look to that data because it's going to be important to make sure that you're able to connect the kinds of things you're talking about to the sort of audience you have in the room. So, for instance, remember, since you're taking a side in a political campaign, you're going to need to deal with the reality of resistant audience members. You can imagine, based on our data, that approximately a third of the audience is relatively supportive of your position or a position close to yours, based on being a Democrat or a Republican. But that also means that about a third of the audience is going to be opposed to the candidate that you're presenting, simply because they come from the other political party. And there's going to be about a third of the audience that considers themselves neutral, moderate, undecided, and these folks might give you a little bit more room to work. But you need to take into account that anything you say and the ways in which you say it need to account for folks that are going to be thinking about counter arguments or may distrust what you have to say because of your political position. So don't just preach to the choir, right? Don't just focus on those that are already on your side. You need to think about those who might be opposing your position and get them to open their minds to think about things in a different way. Remember logos, right? We need to focus your arguments on reasonable, logical construction. So this, of course, means having good evidence and citing that evidence. But remember, it's not just about the evidence you have, it's about the arguments you make. How do you structure the subpoints within your main points so that you're making claims, you're supporting the claims with evidence, and then providing explanation that details the reasons, helps the audience connect the dots logically. Remember ethos. You need to establish yourself as credible and trustworthy advocates, particularly for those audience members that might be resistant to your point of view. So again, this means citing your sources and making sure that you've got good, credible, unbiased sources. But this also means that you need to think about things like good moral values. You can speak to all of your audience, even those who might be resistant to your political party or your specific candidate, based on values or principles that you know that they're going to agree with, and use that as a basis for establishing common ground. As well, remember that key ethos strategy of goodwill, establishing that you accepting the point of view is something they can trust because you're not just doing it to win, but you're doing it because you have the audience's best interests at heart. And of course, remember pathos, the use of emotional appeals and sensory description in things like narrative anecdotes, examples, whether they be real examples or hypothetical examples, the use of images or videos in the presentation aids to stimulate the senses. Emotional appeal is very important in political persuasion. Sometimes candidates and organizations go overboard in the pathos. You'll probably find that the best combination of persuasion is going to balance appealing to our mind with logos, as well as appealing to our soul with ethos and our heart and our guts with pathos. And with whatever you do, all of these kinds of appeals need to think about being direct, personalized, and inclusive. Of course, you'll make references to Americans. You may make references to contemporary society. But remember, you are speaking to the approximately 20 people in the audience that they're the ones whose vote you want to influence. So make sure that they are attended to using inclusive language like we, us, our, you, and your. In your presentation style, try to establish direct eye contact, making sure that they feel, based on their knowledge, their beliefs, their feelings, their values, that you're making a real connection of common ground between them and your candidate. Now, obviously, since this is a group presentation, thinking about the collaborative process is going to be important. We'll spend a little time in class talking about processes of group collaboration and listening, but here's the basic things you need to know for now. You're going to need to meet as a group. I would imagine that you'll probably want to meet pretty frequently, maybe a couple of times a week at least, between now and the time that you're actually going to present. You're also going to need to figure out ways to share your work. So think about online platforms like Google Drive in order to share your documents so that you're able to collaborate things for the working outline, for instance. Think about not just when you're going to meet and where you're going to meet, although you really need to nail that down pretty clearly. But think about ways that you might be able to maximize communication between your meetings. Are you going to use email? Are you going to use group texts? Are there other kinds of mechanisms you're going to use to make sure everybody keeps closely in touch with each other? Remember that each member of the group needs to contribute equally to the project. Certainly in the presentation, there's an expectation that each member is going to speak for approximately the same amount of time. So you really shouldn't have somebody that just gives a very brief introduction and a very brief conclusion and then sits down and lets everybody else do the work. Everyone needs to present roughly the same amount of substantive things. So that means that each member is going to need to contribute in the preparation process as well, in the research, in the argument construction, in the outlining process, and in the rehearsal. Everybody's got to cover their fair share. So this means as well that each member really needs to have a voice in this process. Sometimes in groups, it may happen that one or two members of the group exert pretty strong leadership over everybody else. Now, leadership in a group is a great thing. It really is necessary for at least one person in a group to be able to establish some sense of coordination and some sense of discipline so that things can get done, and to make sure that everybody is involved in the process. Because the flip side of leadership is making sure that everybody is involved. It can be the case that a very strong leader or a couple of strong personalities in a group may end up taking over things and then shutting down or marginalizing other members of the group. Now, the problem here is that those folks that get shut out of the process, that don't get to have their voice heard, end up not being as invested in the project, and that leads to problems. So make sure everybody has an opportunity to have their input considered and brought into the project. Just let me know. Now, there are occasionally problem children in groups, and it's really important to look specifically at the guidelines for the assignment in the student handbook and on the blackboard. Because if there's a member of the group that does not carry their weight, it's going to be important for the members of the group to deal with that, to confront this person up front directly and make sure that they end up doing what they're supposed to do. If it becomes a problem, you can certainly come to me and we can get this worked out. But there is a possibility that this group member might just not do what they're supposed to do. There's going to be a couple of mechanisms to deal with that. First of all, after the assignment's completed, everybody is going to complete an individual peer evaluation, which basically provides some feedback on the contributions that each group member had to the overall project. But if you really have a problem child that just after repeated efforts by the group just isn't doing what they're supposed to do, the group can exercise the ejection mechanism. You can kick a member out of the group if they're just not doing it. You need to provide me with a written rationale, but if you are successful, anyone who's ejected from the group has to complete an individual 25-page research paper on a topic of my choice, or they get 0 points for the group speech. This is standard COMM 1200 policy. This isn't just Dr. Klein being a hard case. So you want to make sure that you are not that problem child, that everybody is carrying their level of the load. So if you've got any questions or concerns about this project, either up front or while you're in the process of putting it together, please don't hesitate to let me know. Give me a call, shoot me an email, make an appointment for office hours. I'm willing to meet with individuals. I'm willing to meet with entire groups. Just let me know what works for you. And this is going to be a challenging final project, but it's really going to bring together all of the skills that you've worked on so far, and it's going to bring to it an additional element that will absolutely be relevant to most professional and academic applications that you're going to have in the future. This is not the first time, and it won't be the last time that you will have needed to work with a group to provide a presentation. This is a skill set that in all likelihood you will use in the future. So I encourage you to take this project seriously and have fun with it. This is a great opportunity to use persuasive creativity. Let's end the semester on a strong note. And if you have any questions or concerns,